I just want to talk about the contour of the reinforcing and the tolerance-inducing effects of alcohol. What do I mean by that? Well, here we are back to our old friend, meaning the molecule that comes up over and over again in these podcast episodes, which is dopamine. Whether or not somebody has a predisposition to alcoholism or not, whether or not they're an experienced drinker or not, when people initially start drinking, there are increases in dopamine, or what we call dopaminergic transmission. Dopamine is involved in motivation, craving. It creates a sense of well-being. It increases energy. Again, typically only at the beginning of alcohol exposure. That occurs in most people as a sharp spike, as an increase. Again, if somebody does not have alcohol dehydrogenase or has very low levels of the enzyme that convert that acetaldehyde into acetate and metabolize alcohol, in other words, they will feel sick and lousy in a way that will override any recognition of the dopamine release. They're going to be the people that are listening to this and just think, alcohol just makes me feel sick. I don't like it. Okay, that's a specific subcategory of people, but most people experience some sort of mild euphoria. That's why so many people drink, right? The current estimates are that in most countries, and certainly in the US, as many as 80% of the adult legal drinking age population drinks alcohol. And that number could be even higher now because in the last couple of years, there's been a trend towards increased alcohol consumption, especially in the wake of the pandemic and during the pandemic. Topic for another time. So there's an increase in dopamine and an increase in serotonin. So it's kind of an increase in well-being, an increase in mood, but it's a very short-lived increase. Very soon after, and actually triggered by that increase, is a long and slow reduction in dopamine and serotonin and related molecules and circuits. So basically what you're getting is a blip of feel good followed by a long, slow arc of feeling not so great, which is why typically people will drink again and again across the night. The key thing to understand about tolerance is that with tolerance, the duration of that long, slow reduction in dopamine and serotonin gets even longer. In other words, the negative effects of alcohol that happen after the initial feeling good extend longer and in fact get more robust. However, there's also a reduction in the reinforcing properties of alcohol. There's a shrinking of the feel-good blip that happens when one first ingests alcohol. And this has been measured in animals and humans. So the first drink that somebody has, provided they have enough alcohol dehydrogenase that it doesn't make them feel nauseous and sick right away, they feel really good. And then as it wears off, they feel kind of lousy and they want to drink more. So they might drink more. With each subsequent drink, and even drinks on different nights or even different weeks, the amount of dopamine that's released is reduced. The amount of serotonin that's released is reduced. So what you're getting is less and less of the reinforcing properties of alcohol, the feel-good stuff, and more of the punishment pain signal aspects of alcohol. This is the contour of chemical release in the brain that was referred to by my colleague, the incredible Dr. Anna Lembke, who's a medical doctor. She wrote the incredible book, Dopamine Nation. She was a guest on this podcast, on Joe Rogan's podcast, on Rich Roll's podcast, and several other podcasts, world expert in addiction. And she talked about this pleasure-pain balance that extends beyond alcohol to things like sex and gambling and to other behaviors that can potentially become addictive, but certainly includes alcohol. So tolerance, it seems, is a process in which people are ingesting more and more alcohol as an attempt to get that feeling of well-being back. But what they're really getting is an extended period of punishment, of pain, and of malaise from the alcohol. Now you might say, well, how does that relate to tolerance? Well, it turns out what they do behaviorally, and when I say they, I mean animals do this and humans do this, is they start drinking more and more in an attempt to activate those dopamine and serotonin neurons and receptors. And as they do that, there is an increase in alcohol dehydrogenase. So the enzyme that metabolizes alcohol is increased because the body and liver have to contend with all that alcohol. So now you've got, again, the two-hit model. You're getting less of the feel-good chemicals, more of the negative chemical release or pattern of subjective feeling, I should say. And you're metabolizing alcohol more quickly and more readily, but it's not taking you to a better place in terms of how you feel. That's one of the major underlying reasons for what we call tolerance. So if you're somebody who drinks and you notice that the feeling that you are seeking with alcohol is now requiring an additional drink or drinks, plural, chances are you are disrupting the dopamine and serotonergic systems of your brain, and you are doing that in a way that is increasing the pain and punishment signals that follow alcohol ingestion. And again, that's not just on the night that you're drinking, but afterwards as well. Is that all bad news? Well, pretty much. But the good news is that if you abstain from drinking for some period of time, then of course these systems reset. How long you need to abstain will depend on how much you were drinking and how long you were drinking for. Certainly people who have alcohol use disorder, who are alcoholics, their main goal should be to quit alcohol completely. I know there's some debate about this, and I don't want to get into that debate because I'm certainly not going to try and direct anyone's recovery. There are expert counselors and MDs and people that can work with people. In fact, for some very heavy drinkers and people with serious alcohol use disorder, going cold turkey, that is stopping drinking completely, can actually be medically dangerous. So the path to sobriety for certain people looks different than the path to sobriety for other people. What I'm referring to here are people that are ingesting, again, somewhere between, on average, 1 to 2 drinks per night, whether or not that's done night to night or whether or not that's condensed to weekend use. I know a number of people are going to ask, perhaps are screaming, is drinking good for me in any way? For instance, many people have probably heard that resveratrol is good for people and that red wine is enriched in resveratrol. I hate to break it to you, but the reality is that if indeed resveratrol is good for us, and there's some debate about this, some people say strongly yes, some people say no, other people say maybe, the amount of red wine that one would have to drink in order to get enough resveratrol, in order for it to be health promoting, is so outrageously high that it would surely induce other negative effects that would offset the positive effects of resveratrol. So I wish I could tell you different. Again, I'm not here to be the bearer of bad news, but the statement I just made was confirmed by Dr. David Sinclair when he was a guest on this podcast. It's confirmed by other researchers who work on resveratrol and related pathways. I wish I could tell you that red wine is good for your health, and indeed, it might be through some other mechanisms. So for instance, there have been studies of low to moderate red wine consumption. This would be anywhere from 1 to 4 glasses per week. And I don't mean enormous glasses, I mean 6-ounce glasses of red wine. And in those cases, some of the stress reduction that can be induced by consumption of red wine, maybe some of the other micronutrients and components within red wines, in particular red wines that come from particular grapes, and this gets really nuanced and frankly is not well worked out in the peer-reviewed literature, certainly not clinical trials, at least not that I'm aware of. Tell me if you're aware of a great clinical trial on this. Well, there may be some positive effects of that very low level of consumption. I'm not trying to take away anybody's red wine. I'm not trying to take away anybody's anything. I would be remiss, however, if I didn't tell you that resveratrol as the argument for drinking red wine in particular is just not a good one. It's just not supported by the peer-reviewed research. A few other things about alcohol and health. At the beginning of the episode, I referenced a study showing that indeed, not just heavy alcohol consumption of 12 to 24 or more drinks per week, but also light to moderate alcohol consumption of any type, wine, beer, spirits, etc., does reduce the thickness of the brain. It really does reduce cortical thickness. In fact, it actually scales with the amount of alcohol that people drink. And this has been well documented in a number of different studies. I can provide a link to several of these. One of the more striking ones actually shows that there's almost a dose-dependent increase in shrinkage of the gray matter volume and in these white matter tracts, these axons, these wires as it would, that connect different neurons as a function of how much alcohol people drink. And that's also what's been seen in this recent study that I referenced at the beginning and that's in the show note captions. So again, probably the best amount of alcohol to drink would be 0 glasses per week or ounces per week. For those of you drinking low amounts of alcohol, make sure you're doing other things to promote your health. And for those of you that are drinking moderate, and certainly for those of you that are heavy drinkers, please do everything you can to move away from that and to quit entirely. But even for the moderate consumers of alcohol, you are going to want to be aware of some of the negative health effects and do things to offset those if indeed you're not going to stop drinking or reduce your intake.